All right. Hello, everyone. And thank you so much for joining us for Leading Forward, our speaker series. We were thrilled with the series last summer and are excited to extend it into this year. My name is Kate Treitman Brown, and I graduated from Nobles in 1999, and now I work as the Director of Graduate Affairs. We appreciate you spending the next 45 minutes to an hour with us. And we have a fantastic program tonight, one that is incredibly timely given the state of the world and the country. Thanks to the Graduate Council and especially to the tech team at Nobles for helping us to engage with you all this evening. We will hear from our speakers and then we'll have an opportunity for question and answer. You can use the Q&A function at any time during the presentation if anything pops up. Normally, I would have the pleasure of introducing our speakers, but tonight we have a special introduction from one of our young graduate committee members, Rachel Janfaza. Rachel graduated from Nobles in 2016 and from Harvard last spring. And then she immediately began working as an associate writer at CNN with Kylie. Rachel, I will turn it over to you. You can go ahead and turn on your video to introduce our speakers.
Hi, thank you, Kate. So it's a pleasure to be here. Kylie and Peter will be discussing Kylie's career in journalism, including her beginnings in the field and how Nobles influenced her. They will also focus on the role of journalism in 2020 and how it has evolved in current times. I'm thrilled to welcome our panelists. Peter Howe graduated from Nobles in 1982 and has had a distinguished career in journalism and communications. No surprise, at Nobles, Peter was editor-in-chief of The Nobleman. He has continued to stay involved as a graduate and is currently a member of the Graduates Council, the sponsoring organization for this very speaker series. Currently, Peter is senior advisor at Denterline, a Boston strategic communications, public relations, and crisis communications consulting firm, where he works with a wide range of clients, particularly focusing on energy, construction, and Massachusetts public policy issues. Peter joined Denterline in 2016 after a 3-decade award-winning career in journalism, 22 years as a reporter and editor for the Boston Globe, covering business, technology, and political beats, and 8 years with New England Cable News as its on-air business editor and host of its CEO Corner Show. Peter and I also have something in common as he graduated from Harvard College as well. He now lives in Newton with his wife and novelist Holly LaCroix, 2 college-age sons, and a daughter in law school. Kylie Atwood graduated from Nobles in 2007, the oldest of 5 Atwoods who attended. At Nobles, Kylie was heavily involved in photography. In her words, "It is what ultimately led me to journalism, starting out by telling stories with photographs." No surprise, Kylie was the photo editor for The Nobleman and also led the Community Service Club. She also played soccer, squash, and lacrosse. The Atwood family also spent extensive stints of time internationally, especially in South Africa, doing service projects. Kylie is currently a national security correspondent for CNN and is based in Washington, D.C. Since joining the network in 2019, Kylie has reported on developments throughout the impeachment hearings of President Trump. She also broke several stories in key elements of the Trump administration's foreign policy agenda. Additionally, she broke stories on U.S.-North Korea talks and details of Trump's conversations with Kim Jong-un. In January of 2020, Kylie was included in Crane's News Pros 12 to watch in TV news. Prior to joining CNN, Kylie was the CBS News State Department reporter. She has reported from dozens of countries around the world, including Russia, Afghanistan, China, Mexico, and North Korea. She graduated cum laude from Middlebury College with a major in international studies and a minor in economics. She was awarded high honors for her senior thesis on U.S.-Somalia relations. In college, she developed a passion for journalism as she spent time working for 60 Minutes, Global Post, WPTZ in Vermont, and the Addison County Independent newspaper. Kylie also dedicated a year to national service as a core member for City Year. Kylie is on the board of Report for America, which is supporting a new generation of journalists to serve in community news organizations across the United States. We are so honored to have both Peter and Kylie with us tonight, and I'm now going to turn it over to them.
Rachel, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I hope at some point we get to talk about how much pride Andy Janfaza and Uncle David Janfaza deserve to have in you and your awesome Nobles career. And I want to thank everybody who's made time to join us tonight for what I know is going to be a rich and fascinating conversation. As a former nobleman editor, I'm always thrilled to see another nobleman editor make it big in journalism, as Kylie has. And as an American, I'm very happy any night that there is not a national security emergency, especially tonight, so that CNN's national security correspondent can be with us. So, Kylie, it looks like we've successfully connected with you. Can't tell if your mute may still be on.
No, I don't think
Good.
it is. Hopefully it's not.
Excellent. It wouldn't be TV if there weren't technical difficulties. So I thought a great place to start might be to talk about sort of the parameters of your job. What does a typical week, typical day look like for you? Of our, various branches of government that touch on national security, who are you typically talking to and reporting on in a normal day?
Yeah, so first of all, thanks to Nobles for doing this event. I think it'll be really fun. Peter, I look forward to chatting with you. And Rachel and I have gotten to know each other over text, and then we finally met in person yesterday. So she's a great new member of the CNN team. So I think this will just be a really fun conversation about journalism. So yeah, national security. I mean, what on earth does that mean? I think it's one of the broadest beats that you could have as a reporter, because it could mean anything, right? It has to do with, election security. It has to do with the security of our borders. It has to do with wartime and times of peace. But what I do is really focus on the diplomacy aspect of national security. And so I have an office, a CNN little mini office. It's more like a closet, actually, at the State Department. And that is where I spend most of my time. And my job is essentially to get to know as many US diplomats as I can, so that I can understand the conversations that they are having with our allies, and the tough conversations that they're having with our adversaries internationally, and try and report that out. Explain to people, why an administration has chosen a certain policy to pursue, why they have put sanctions into place, what those sanctions mean for American companies who have, relations with any of those people who have been sanctioned. And in today's age, it really means just watching what's happening on the international front as we're a few weeks away from the election. So there's a few things that the administration is still working on, and I'm keeping track of those. I was saying to you earlier, it's really just kind of mending to the garden right now to make sure that I don't miss anything that's happening.
I know, don't ask me why I know this, but a lot of people are under the assumption that when you see a television reporter speaking on TV, somebody else has written what they're saying, and they're just reading it off a teleprompter. Just tell us how that really works in terms of when we see you debriefing with Jake Tapper, or when we see you presenting from your little cubbyhole at the State Department.
Yeah, I mean, listen, there are, anchors in TV that need to use teleprompters. I've never used a teleprompter in my life. Everything that I'm discussing on air is something that I've reported on. And a large part of my job, even though I do a lot of television, is also written pieces for CNN.com. And I really do like when I've written a piece, I've dug into it, I know who the characters are, I know what the storyline is extremely well, because then when I talk about that story on television, I know exactly where I'm going with it. Now, of course, in breaking news case scenarios, you are just reporting what you are learning, development by development. And so in neither of those situations is anyone writing, what I'm reading. Now, I do collaborate with the team at CNN. They're great. If I write stories for digital, I work with my national security kind of team to do that. Or if we're writing, a longer package, which is a piece where you'd hear the reporter's voice narrating over it, I would work with the producer on that. But ultimately, the reporting that I am putting out is what I have worked really hard on. So I'm not reading much of anything.
I mean, so you're really doing exactly the same things that your counterparts at the New York Times or Washington Post are doing. At the end of the day, they simply sit down and write. You sit down and write but you're also speaking on TV as well.
Yeah, that's right. And a lot of our competition comes from just those folks that you cited. We are trying to beat the New York Times on stories. We're trying to beat the Washington Post on stories. And because of the day and age in which we live, the 24-hour news cycle, there's a lot of reporting to be done that can be done. And so we really do focus on that, whether it's, enterprise stories or sort of kind of breaking news developments on a certain issue.
Right. I want to be careful and respectful of the fact that there's a lot of ongoing journalism, and you are figuring out what you feel like you can and can't report at any given time based on how well sourced, how well developed the story is. I do think a lot of people would be very curious to hear any insights you can offer about the alleged Hunter Biden laptop and how a news organization like CNN is trying to figure out how do we make sense of this and what do we think we responsibly can report about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, and it's an area where we have to be, where we've been really careful. So there was this story that broke in the New York Post. It gave, new details into allegations of these emails that Vice President Biden's son, Hunter Biden, was allegedly sending with some Ukrainians, surrounding business dealings in Ukraine. Now, CNN has not been able to authenticate any of those emails. So realistically speaking, in layman terms, what that means, not being able to authenticate something means that we have no proof that those emails are real. So as in that respect, we cannot really report on something if we ourselves haven't found it to be true. And particularly if there's reason to believe that there is some sort of, malicious nature associated with this. And in this instance, what we have reported is that the FBI is looking into this Hunter Biden allegedly owned laptop, and they are looking to see if it's part of a greater Russian disinformation campaign that's aimed at Biden's campaign. So we know that there is some nefarious, there's reason for there to be questions about, the nefarious nature of these emails. And we have to be really careful not to put out information that we don't know to be true, because that is the role of, real journalists, to check the facts, to make sure we know that what we're sharing is actually true. And then obviously, updating that as we learn more.
As somebody who was in the business for a while, one of the subplots that I found really striking was that the reporter at the New York Post, who did most of the writing of that article, would not allow his byline to be put on the story. Obviously got a take on what I think that means. I wonder if you, when you heard that piece of the story, what does that mean to you? What do you think people should know about the significance of that?
Yeah, I mean, Peter, you said it. It's important as a reporter because, my mom or dad sitting at home isn't going to look at the name on the byline of a New York Post story necessarily. But if I, as Kylie Atwood, wrote that story, they're going to look at it, right? So your name stays with you on every single story that you write. And, the errors that are made or the false information that's put out, that then becomes associated with the person who wrote it, not just the outlet. And you could go back and look at articles that I wrote while I was at CBS News, and I am proud of all of those articles because I put my name on them. I put a lot of hard work, and I really believed that what I was telling was true. So yeah, you're right. It is a red flag if a reporter wants to take their name off of a story because it indicates that they don't agree with something that is in that story. We really don't know what that is at this point, though.
Right. Let's talk about some of the amazing places that you've been. Hanoi for the summit with President Trump and the Kim Jong-il, the leader of, or Kim Jong-un, leader of North Korea, to the Philippines, to Singapore. Tell us some, stories from the road of what it's like to be, one of the sea of reporters covering one of those epic summits.
Yeah. Well, it really depends kind of what the nature of the assignment is when you get on the ground. What a lot of people don't know is that, at these major international summits, there are hundreds and thousands of reporters that show up, and there are only a few reporters that actually end up going to the events themselves, because there's something called a pool report that's put out, and that's put out by the folks on the TV side. A few TV cameras are in there. They share all of that information with all of the TV networks, and there are print reporters who share what they are seeing and hearing with all of the print reporters. Now, Hanoi is an example of that. I was not one of the pool reporters. And so as a result, I spent a lot of time in Hanoi alone in my hotel room. And that's because I was on the overnight shift. So we were about 10 hours ahead, which meant that I was reporting overnight Hanoi hours, which were dayside here in the United States. And then during the day, I was just sleeping at my hotel room and then rushing back to where I had to do a live shot. So it's not really all that glamorous. The thick of it is pretty intense and the hours are grueling, but it's also like incredibly fun. Because you do find those moments, particularly reporters like myself who just love traveling, to get out and go for a walk and, see what the country is like that you're in, even though we would love a bigger dose of that. I mean, traveling is a lot of why I love my job. And to be able to go to places like Hanoi, to be able to go to places like, the Philippines, Singapore, Latin America. I mean, it's been like super incredible. Afghanistan a few times. And so it's really interesting, kind of depending on where you're going and what your assignment is, how different your experience on the ground is.
I assume that X% of a summit you could cover from your laptop sitting on your sofa at home. But there's got to be added extra value of being there and getting background briefings from State Department officials and just added clues and atmospherics that help you figure out the story as best you can.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, you see things, you hear things, you run into officials at the bar at night who can, give you an off the record kind of update as to how things are going. All of that is tremendously important. And it also, really helps you develop the relationships with these people, right? I've talked to you about this, as we've connected over the last few days, but I think what a lot of people don't realize is that reporting has so much to do with relationships and trusting relationships that you build with people, because no one's going to want to tell me anything if they don't trust me. And no one's going to want to tell me anything if they don't think that I understand the issues, right? And so when you kind of are able to get up to speed in a more informal setting on these trips with these officials and you're in other countries, it really is a bonding experience, and it does help you tell the story in a more fulsome way, I really think.
We live obviously in a time when there is not just skepticism of news media, but hostility, and I would say fomented hostility towards many branches of the news media. How have you experienced that personally, and what's that been like?
Yeah, that is hard, and it's a sad reality. I will say, just a personal anecdote, when I covered 2016 out on the road, for a year and a half, traveling to different states. I worked for CBS News at the time, and I was definitely lumped in with the rest of the reporters, at these Trump rallies when he would call out, the reporters and say negative things about them. He was talking about all of us. And now that I'm at CNN, it's even more criticism that you're receiving from, not just the president, but the president's supporters. So an example of that, I covered July 4th here in Washington, D.C. for CNN out in the mall. And, that was last year. There were tons of Trump supporters from all across the country. And a lot of them, didn't want to talk to me because I'm with CNN. And so that's a really kind of just sad reality of the divisive and divided country that we're living in right now. But I truly believe that, as reporters, if we try and talk to everyone and tell everyone's story, then that's going to help us bridge this divide. So we have to keep doing what we're doing, even though we face this pushback. And it's really just the daily grind of trying to bring the news and what's really happening to people that I think is going to hopefully engender some more trust.
What would you say is the quality and level of your access to officials who are making decisions? And I think in particular, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who's somebody you reported on often. Do you get the access that is helpful for understanding the thinking of the State Department?
Yeah, well, there's not a ton. So let's just focus on the secretary himself. Secretary Pompeo came over from the CIA. He was the director of the CIA when, Trump's term began. He came over to the State Department. There was a feeling within the department among diplomats that he was going to be really good for the diplomats. He talked a lot about the swagger of the State Department, how proud he was. He really has not spent a significant time with the reporters who cover him day in and day out. Now, he comes and he does, a weekly press conference these days at the department, which are great. And you have, on the record comments from him. What he isn't doing is much off the record engagement, if any at all, with reporters. Now, I haven't covered the State Department for long enough to have been around when Secretary Kerry was there or Secretary Clinton, but I know reporters who were there, and I know that those secretaries made an effort to develop a relationship in an off-the-record sense, over pizza, over popcorn, those kinds of things, to get to know the reporters. Pompeo has not done that. Now, I will say, however, that I do think that there is pretty good access to officials at the State Department. And I sometimes think if maybe that's because there is, a level of frustration with the Trump administration and their handling of foreign policy, that some of the diplomats want to talk to me more. They want to tell me stories. But I will say that even senior officials of the Trump administration at the department will discuss things with us and are, able to kind of explain to me what's happening. So even though Pompeo isn't, the people around him, I do think are pretty good at doing that.
Good. I would love to get to how you got from Nobles to Middlebury to CBS and then later CNN, but just any other questions I should have asked you, kind of insights into your life and work at CNN, the good, the bad, the exciting.
Let's see how I got to CNN. Okay. As Rachel said when she introduced me, photography is the way that I ended up being a journalist. I love photography mostly because I just looked at a picture and I could see a story. And I remember, classes with Mr. Swayze, Joe Swayze. I loved those classes. He would always, have us really look at what we were seeing and what that was telling and, what we also weren't seeing, right? So I learned a lot from him. And then when I went to Middlebury, I started writing for the paper there. And I don't know. I mean, I think that writing news articles can be a little bit intimidating for people. And I would say if there are young Noble students, just try it. I mean, I was intimidated by it and now I do it every day. Like you just have to go there and you have to put one foot in front of the other and try it because you get the hang of it if you like it. And I loved it. I then ended up writing a little bit for the Addison County Independent, which is a local newspaper in Middlebury, working for a local TV station up in Burlington. You really love something when it's your senior spring in college and you're waking up at 5:30 in the morning on a Friday to drive an hour for an unpaid internship, right? I mean, I wanted everything that I could get, every experience that I could have that had to do with journalism. And I really made that happen. And so then I got a great internship with 60 Minutes in New York. That was the summer after my junior year. That's what connected me to CBS. I, miraculously got a job being Bob Schieffer's assistant, which happened like overnight. So another, piece of advice to young college graduates: it's fine if you don't have a job, just keep hammering the people and they'll eventually give you one. Because that's how that ended up for me. And
Was there a magic moment in terms of connecting with Bob Schieffer? Sort of coming in off the street and Shazam your.
It's actually a funny story. I went in for my interview with him, and I showed up for probably the first time in my life an hour early to something. And he was impressed by that because he is always on time. When Bob and I traveled, we were at the airport always, multiple hours before the flight. So that put me on a good, footing. And then he pulled me into the interview. We talked for about half hour. And I remember we really connected, our personalities and how both of us in college had really focused on journalism. Now, Bob went to school in Fort Worth, but he didn't even really go to his classes. Like, he was working for the newspaper, the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, even while he was in college. So he really understood that I was passionate about it because I did that. And I absolutely loved working for him. Learned a tremendous amount. Being an assistant is not just being an assistant. I was his researcher, I was his scheduler, I was his social media person, all of that. And more importantly, I was a fly on the wall, right? He moderated the 2012 debate between Romney and Obama, and I got to help produce that. I mean, it was like the most unbelievable thing. I graduated from college 4 months before, and I'm helping produce a foreign policy debate at the presidential level. Like, it was totally cool. And so ever since then, I've just, loved every day. And I think that that's how I, grew at CBS, and then got over to CNN, which, the details are neither here nor there. But I think being prepared and being kind of dogged in what you want is something that I, was always committed to. And I love every day what I do. And I think that's a really, rare thing, particularly as we as a country are going through such a challenging time. Finding something that you love just, makes your life better and makes everyone else's lives better. So it's great.
Practicing your trade at the Addison County Independent and WPTZ, my sense is that up at the level of CNN, it's the difference between Nobles versus Milton and the Patriots versus the Jets, but it's still football. And there are fundamental things about being a journalist that you learned back in Vermont that I assume are really at the core of what you do today.
100%. Yeah. No, Peter, that's exactly it. There was, I'll never forget, they sent me out to help cover a car crash at WPTZ. You can't cover a car crash unless you go to the site, right? And it's the same thing with journalism. If there's a summit between Trump and Kim Jong-un, you can cover it, as you said, from your bed watching it, but it's not as good. You need to get as close as you can to the actual event. And I learned that even up in Burlington, because they're doing just as important and, informative reporting on a local scale. So I totally agree with that sentiment.
That's great. Well, it certainly speaks to the value of that after junior year of college internship, and where that internship is can really establish kind of the launch trajectory of a young person's career. So everybody who's watching, who's got a chance to give a junior in college a summer internship, please do it, because I know how much it meant to Kylie. I know how much it meant to me at the Boston Globe as an intern who was able to come back straight out of college afterwards. We're starting to get some questions coming in, so I want to begin to engage some of the audience questions. We've had, Kylie, the phrase alternative facts be brought into the discussion, and how you deal with those, your experience of seeing or hearing what seemed to you like potentially alternative facts? Let me know also if we need to give you a couple seconds for.
My battery's low, so I'm just plugging in an extra charger here. The trials and tribulations of technology.
That's how you know this is authentic.
Yeah, exactly.
This is the world we're living in.
Yeah.
Right. So my question was that came in from one of the people who's tuned in for the webinar is alternative facts, and what that phrase in your experience means and how you contend with them.
Yeah. Wow. Where do I begin? Alternative facts are someone who has an agenda using a certain, set of information that they have found, somewhere, maybe from one tweet that they saw, maybe from, the bottom of the bucket on a, chat that they were on. I mean, these are facts that people just kind of put out there to essentially back up whatever they want the conclusion to be. And it really is extremely dangerous. We are seeing this play out with the coronavirus pandemic. For months, I think there was criticism of the outlets that were covering the coronavirus cases that were continuing to increase in certain states and not covering the cases as much on television that were going down in other states. Ultimately, if you're comparing, where you should put your emphasis, when people are dying, that deserves attention. When people are losing their jobs, that deserves attention. And those numbers of those deaths and of those cases have real significance. They have real life impact. So it's been kind of interesting to watch how, that's played out over the last 6 months. And I do think, though, that as the pandemic has gone on and as people have realized, that facts presented by scientists are really what we should trust. They predicted that it would get worse in the fall. Well, guess what? It's worse in the fall again. Anyways, I just think that the facts as they stand are really important, and particularly picking out which facts you want to use to tell an important story. So it's a tough one.
You talked a few minutes ago about career diplomats who are eager to speak to you to give a different perspective from what may be coming from the Secretary of State's office. There must also be resources in Congress, intelligence agencies, think tanks that help you figure out, what's true and what's spin of what's being said to me.
Yeah. Peter, Congress is one of the best places to go because you've got two opposing parties. So if the Democrats are saying something, you can go to the Republicans and check what they think, and they're going to critique the heck out of it. I have found that the committees on the Hill who focus on foreign policy are some of my most helpful sources, because they are constantly looking at how the foreign policy of the U.S. government is being made, and they are critiquing it and trying to make it better. So they are very, very helpful to me. And then, in all different agencies, right? You have, you mentioned the IC, the intelligence community. There are 17 agencies that fall into the U.S. intelligence community. That's incredible, right? That's a lot of people that you can get to know. And, spies aren't really supposed to talk to reporters, but you can get to know people in these places. And it's important to get to know the people, not just at the top, but at the bottom, who are looking at the information as it's coming in, who are, synthesizing it, and who are really the first line of, defense and analysis. So one thing that I really do try and do is get to know folks who are at the lower levels of the U.S. government, because they see things from a different perspective. And I will say that American diplomats, they are not political. They just aren't. They wouldn't have gotten into the profession if they wanted to be political. They do it because they love foreign policy and, they love the country, and that's how they want to serve. So they're really informed perspectives because they've been doing the work for a long time, and they're also really fun people to get to know.
From those conversations, that shoe leather reporting, as we used to call it, do you have a sense at this point that there are important national security issues that Americans should be paying more attention to than we currently are, or issues that should be getting more attention in the media than are, or conversely, things that are getting turned into bigger issues than they actually are?
Yeah, Peter, I mean, I do think that we cover a lot of the big issues in foreign policy. And I fight for the issues that I think we should be covering, So in terms of what we're covering, sometimes my fear is less so that we're not covering it, and more so that the American people have decided they're going to tune out, right? Oh, they're talking about China again. I don't understand what they're talking about. I'm not going to listen. Or, oh, they're talking about, Russia and hacking again. Oh, it's too overwhelming. I can't listen. That is really hard, and it's a reality, right? I mean, how many people sitting at home hear those words and just kind of can't take it anymore? My challenge to people, though, is just to sit down and read an article or two. I have to do it all the time. It's, I'm at school every day as a reporter. For example, tomorrow I'm, moderating an event that has to do with an international technology alliance that there's a think tank putting out a new report on, okay? I don't know a whole lot about technology alliances, but I'm learning, and I do the reading and I dive into it. Obviously, it's my job, and I know for people who have long work days, the last thing they want to do is sit down and read the news. But just committing to a foreign policy issue every few months to look into, I think is important. And I will say that I think the American people should be highly cognizant of the threats posed by China. That's something that Republicans and Democrats in Washington agree on. If you look at the DOJ, they've said that in the last 10 years, the intellectual property theft of the Chinese here in the United States has increased by 1,300%, like tremendously more than it ever is. And that cuts across a whole host of different types of work. If you are, a banker, if you're a small business owner, if you're a developer of, new technologies, you need to be aware of that threat. And so tuning into these things, I think, is more the fear, honestly, than not covering them.
Question we got a few minutes ago from Bill Sargent about China. How much have you dug into the question of the origins of COVID-19 and the responsibility of China on that front, and where did it really come from?
Well, we don't know exactly where it really came from, other than it came from China, and it came from Wuhan, China. So that much we know, but we don't know exactly where in Wuhan it originated. And I was smiling when you asked the question, because it's actually something that it's a question that I proposed to the State Department just today. I said, what's the update here? Because the U.S. intelligence community came out and said that they were investigating this. That was months ago. That was in the spring. So do we have any status update? It's not normal for the intelligence community to be so forthcoming about what they're investigating. So if they're going to be that forthcoming about what they're looking into, I would expect that we might get a little more from them as to what those conclusions are. I will say this has become, unfortunately, a very politically fraught issue. Now, as Americans, as citizens of the world, everyone should want to know where this pandemic originated, because it can help us prevent future pandemics. So that's just a fact of the matter. But this administration has been a little bit more forward leaning into intelligence that they've seen related to certain theories and not others. That's cherry picking. And we have seen that done by Secretary Pompeo, claiming that there is some evidence that it came from a lab in Wuhan. Not that it was maliciously made, but that it potentially leaked out from a lab. We know that that's a possibility, but we still really don't know if it came from there or if it came from a wet lab. But I can assure you that this is something that I continue to ask them about. And, I don't want to go on ad nauseum about this, but the other thing is that, China is hard to figure things out from. They shut down to the international community. The World Health Organization has been shut down. So it's going to be even more challenging to figure this one out than any other, pandemic or virus that may have come from a different country.
And as you're reporting on what the intelligence community is reporting itself, how often, in your judgment, are you seeing the intelligence community making 60-40 calls or 55-45 or 51-49? They are trying to figure out a very ambiguous situation, and our best estimate is it's this.
Right.
Is that common, rare to see things in that gray zone?
Yeah, so how the intelligence community works is in degrees of, assuredness, right? So if they have high confidence or low confidence, that's what those are the terminologies that they use to explain to someone the product that they have collected in their reporting. Now, high confidence means you better believe that that's what the intelligence professionals think happened. Low confidence, we have a little bit, we're not sure. The intelligence community would never put something out into the public that they have low confidence on. And so I think what a lot of people, and it's totally understandable, but a lot of people don't realize that the intelligence community works this way. They're always kind of weighing, what they've collected here and what they've collected here. And they're able to do that because the American intelligence community is so incredibly powerful. I mean, we have human assets, we have technology to pick up things that we need to pick up. And so there's all of these different, layers of input. And we see, some of that come to the fore in certain indictments that the Department of Justice makes or sanctions that the US levels. But it is always a matter of, that level of confidence that the intelligence community has in something.
I think you just helped a lot of people be even savvier consumers of news. I want to pivot all the way back to Nobles. We heard Rachel Janfaza talk about the great passion that you had for community service back in your Nobles years. I know one way that you're still participating in that passion is through service on Report for America, their board, which is, I think of as kind of the AmeriCorps of local journalism. I wonder if you can talk some about what you're doing with Report for America and other opportunities in your incredibly busy schedule that you're getting to continue to engage in other kinds of community service.
Well, yeah, I mean, Peter, you hit the nail on the head. Report for America is the AmeriCorps of journalism. And, what for those who aren't familiar with it, it's a tremendous program. The reality is right now that local news stations, local newspapers are dying around the country. We need to keep those alive because, one thing that I always heard Bob Schieffer say when I worked for him is that an independent press is pivotal to democracy. In order for us to have a healthy democracy, we've got to have an independent press, an independent way to collect the facts and present, this alternative view of what the press is seeing. And then you can match it up with what the government is saying. But it's a check on the powers of government. So with all of these local newsrooms, dying, what Report for America has been able to do is inject young people, who are at the beginning of their journalistic careers into these newsrooms to help them with what they need, which is, the bodies to tell these stories, to get out there, to get to the scene, like I was saying. And also, the folks who want to stay up 24/7 and dive into something and really investigate, because local investigations are just as important as national and international investigations to hold people accountable, and to really smell out corruption where it is. And so Report for America, anyone who is an entry level reporter or has been around for 5 or 10 years and wants to go work in a local American newsroom, this is a real opportunity to do that. And it's just been a deeply humbling experience to watch what these reporters have done, because it's really fun to see young people in the newsrooms working on things that they want to work on. And I think back to projects like the Boston Globe and Spotlight. In order to keep alive investigative journalists, you have to have the funding, you've got to have the people, and you've got to have the people who are motivated. And so that is really what Report for America is helping newsrooms do.
I was so struck as a former business reporter by a recent report that talked about the literal financial impact on a community. If you're a city or town or county that wants to go out and sell bonds, Wall Street comes and looks at your community and says, you don't have a local newspaper, we're going to issue a lower rating to your bond because we're more worried about corruption, because there are not the independent eyes of the press making sure people are honest. And there must be all kinds of other benefits that you've seen from the presence of Report for America journalists.
Yeah, I mean, it's remarkable. I also think that, it's smelling out corruption, but it's also reporting on, the effects that climate change is having on even kind of a smaller scale than it is, internationally or as a country. And seeing the small changes are pivotal, because you bring them to the fore, then, people who wouldn't have noticed that notice it, and you can impact policy that way. So it's a really, I can't say enough great things about the organization.
That's awesome. We had a couple questions come in on exactly that front. Just asking for more thoughts or examples of the challenge of digging out information that people in power don't want to get out, and how you work through that challenge every day. I don't know if there's a particular case study that you would point back to in terms of a day that you felt great about. You've talked to me about stories that land in your lap versus stories that you really have to go digging for and bring to light, and what that's like in 2020, getting information and getting it out.
Yeah, so I mean, I often think about how my job is half and half, right? It's breaking news, and I'm there and I'm ready to cover it, and I'm read in on the topic, or I just happen to be there, in during the Boston bombing. I happened to be there. CBS News threw me on air for the first time in my entire life. Being on the scene is just kind of a lot of what reporting is, but it is it's a real challenge and a real art to pull out the stories that people in power don't want told. And an example of that is my colleagues and I did a story a few months ago about Woody Johnson, the NFL owner, team owner, and ambassador to London. And it was a story on the State Department Inspector General doing an investigation into racist and sexist comments that he had made to staff in the embassy. Now, you can be assured that this ambassador, Woody Johnson, didn't want this story told. The minute that it started to get out that we were working on this story, there were forces that wanted to shut it down. And it is so important to develop the relationships, with the sources whose stories you're telling, so that you are still motivated to keep following through and telling that story. Now, we ended up doing it, and I'm really proud of that because it was a real team effort with my colleagues. That's also the other thing about journalism, which is so cool. Like once you find colleagues that you love, you're so lucky. And it's competitive out there, but like once you have your people, it's great. And so yeah, I mean, you have to get to know people. As I said before, it's all about relationships and establishing trust. And I meet people 3, 4, 5 times. They don't tell me anything that's interesting, and then the 6th time I meet them, they'll start to open up. So you have to be committed to put in that time on the relationships as well.
How much has that changed in the era of COVID and Zoom, as opposed to back when we could bump into people in person? Has that made your job that much harder?
Yeah, it has. I'm still lucky in that I am allowed by CNN to go to the State Department. So even though I sit in this tiny office and I get no cell phone service, which is a nightmare for reporting, I am in the building. So I see people walking in and out. Now, it's hard because, I used to spend so much of my time going to events at embassies here, think tank events, source dinners. I had a very busy social calendar slash work calendar during the weeknights. And that has totally shut down. Now, on a personal level, it's been kind of nice because I can just hang out at night and not be worried about missing an event or something like that, if I'm being honest. But I will say that COVID has made it more challenging to just meet people because you can't really get to know someone over text. But because I get to go into the department and I see people every once in a while, that's really helpful. I spend a lot of my time doing socially distanced outdoor coffee dates. And so that's another way to see the folks that I know. So yeah, I mean, it's been challenging, but listen, the challenges that I've faced are not even comparable to the challenges that other people in different industries have faced. So I consider myself, to be very lucky.
It's awesome. I'm mindful of the clock and that we're coming up on 7:30, and we promised to let everybody get off for dinner, drinks, but would love, I thought one last question is reflecting on Nobles. And you talked about being in Joe Swayze's journalism classes. You talked about the chance to develop as a photographer with a nobleman. Just any other parting thoughts about, as you look at the arc of your career so far, and I'm really excited to see what the next 10, 20, 30 years bring for you. What you look back at Nobles and feel was especially important in your development and growth as a journalist?
Yeah, I think, the thing that beyond photography, which I think I've been pretty crystal clear that is why I'm a journalist, right? I picked up a camera as a child with my mom and my grandfather, and then I really grew that while I was at Nobles. So, don't be scared of leaning into the arts, people. I mean, it's not all about the sports. It's not all about, what AP bio class you can get into, which, Lord, I love Nobles for how many AP classes they have. But, I was in AP photography, and it is one of the reasons that I am where I am today. Separate from that, but, related in that it's really, helped me in my career, is that Nobles, no matter what classes you take, teaches you how to write. And I absolutely loved all of my classes in history and in English because they really challenged me to be a decent writer. And that's something that's hard to learn later in life when you get caught into bad habits, or you kind of have writer's block. I mean, at Nobles, if you had writer's block, you were essentially screwed because you were writing all the time. So I think for undergrads who are, still in high school and frustrated with how much you have to write, later in life as a journalist, you will grow to be thankful for that. And I think in many other industries, you'll grow to be thankful for that as well. And then the last thing I would say about Nobles is just, the sense of community with assemblies every morning. It just demonstrates how important it is to be close with the people that you're doing the day-to-day grind with. And high school is one thing and reporting is another. But I didn't really know when I got into the workforce if I would be friends with people that I work with. And much like Nobles, I am very close with those people. And, I'm grateful that I had such a great foundation that taught me how important those relationships are. And I think Peter is muted.
Sorry about that. I fat fingered it. Kylie Atwood, thank you so much. Remember the class of 07 and such a wonderful credit to Nobles. It's fascinating, I think, for all of us to really get a glimpse into your life, your work, your thinking. Next time we see you on CNN, I feel like we're all going to say we really know her and understand where she's coming from. So thank you for making time to talk to us. I want to say also a huge thank you to everybody who has joined us on the webinar, and only wish we could be doing this in the Lawrence Auditorium, but one day we will again soon. And want to say also a big thank you to Kate Brown, and turn it back to you for any parting words. Thank you so much for convening this, making the technology work. And of course, thank you so much to Rachel Janfaza from class of 16 for the wonderful introduction. Glad to see that you are taking your first steps on what we hope will be a long and exciting career in journalism as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Peter. So fun.
All right, thanks to both of you so much. I think you summed it up well, Peter. We so appreciate everyone spending time with us this evening. I put my information in the chat. If you have any questions about Leading Forward, any questions about any of our graduate programs, feel free to reach out. All of our information is also on our different platforms and on our website. And you have my email right there in the chat. Take care and have a good night.